All right. Hi, Jim.
Hello.
How are you tonight?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
Great. So I have with me tonight Jim Barfield of the Copper Skull Project. And this has all come together for me very quickly in the last week. I just had a fabulous conversation with Jim, really, about 4 days ago.
Hmm.
And we talked about everything from Qumran, the Dead Sea Scrolls, and the Copper Scroll. And it just was a natural to bring Jim onto the show here. So I'm going to, most of my subscribers, I'm assuming a lot of people are totally up to speed. I don't think we're going to have to give too much intro on this. But Jim, I said, I hope we can go really deep and a little bit esoteric tonight on this whole concept of the Copper Scroll and Qumran. And I have a whole list of questions here. So I'm going to start with the most obvious one, number one. And I am just going to say for you to give your Reader's Digest, what is the Copper Scroll? For those who might not be able to see, quick history and your involvement.
Yeah, the Copper Scroll is a literally a document that is about 7 feet long, about a foot wide, and it has approximately 57 locations of some amazing gold treasure, and gems, things that they're going to use, including vessels. But those are the most important things: are the vessels and the artifacts that potentially could be resting right at Qumran, where I believe all of these places are buried at. So the Copper Scroll lists an amazing amount of artifacts, and those artifacts, if in fact they're the same artifacts that were hidden by Jeremiah, and I absolutely believe they are, then that could be out of Second Maccabees talks about potentially the tabernacle and all of its artifacts. So it's a document that I believe was written at the time of Jeremiah, and that it's even talked about in several different older documents. They're not ancient documents, but they're older documents that were written like in the 1600s,
Right.
and around that time frame. So there's a lot of other support other than just my imagining that it's Jeremiah. But I mean, Jeremiah is the most logical human being that could have had these things written. Baruch, his scribe, I'm sure was involved in it, and so were two other prophets, Haggai and Zechariah. Those guys, I believe, were absolutely involved in it. And they were, if you look at the Copper Scroll, the Copper Scroll has actually got handwriting of those two prophets. If in fact all the information that we've received and have been and studying this for the last 12, almost 13 years now, then they're absolutely part of that process. But that's it. That's what the Copper Scroll is. It's a verbal treasure map, but it's far more than that. Because what if we open up one of these locations and they've got some documents? They even talked about documents in two different places. One is at the entrance to if I'm correct, the Qumran, the ancient doorway or gateway for Qumran. It talks about scrolls of Haggai being buried there. That would just be amazing, because the book of Haggai today, it's just a little bitty short thing. You can read it probably in about 10 minutes. It's
Right.
really nothing to it. But the scroll of Haggai, some of the scrolls of Haggai were very important, and I'm not sure exactly why, but they're even mentioned in the Dead Sea Scrolls, that the people at Qumran had to be versed on not just the Torah and the books of the prophets, but also on the book of Haggai, which of course is one of the prophets. And it's one of the ones that they require before you enter into that covenant, is you have to know the books of Haggai. And that's interesting that they would bury that particular scroll right there beneath your feet as you're entering into the compound for the men of the Dead Sea Scrolls.
So let me just recap just a couple of things. So the Copper Scroll, and everyone understands was one of the texts found within the body of the Dead Sea Scrolls, but it was like written on copper. That's what made it so different. Everything else is like an animal skin or a scroll on
Yes.
a parchment. So here we have them on copper, and it is turned out to be a total treasure map. Now, what makes you unique, Jim, if I can say again, is that you feel that, and I know people, it was, tell us again the history. It was found in like 1952 in a cave,
Yeah.
kind of a fake cave behind. Just tell that quick little story again.
You bet.
Yeah.
What happened was after they, excuse me, after they buried all these artifacts and treasures, they had to have it put it in a place that would be secure. Well, they hid it in what is commonly known as Cave 3 today. It's about 8/10 of a mile from the Qumran ruins. And the very opening phrase on the copper scroll says, "Under the ruins in the valley of Achor." Well, I knew where the Valley of Achor was, but the only set of ruins that I was really familiar with, were the Qumran ruins, because I've been studying them at that time, for about 5 or maybe longer, maybe even 10 years. So I knew those ruins pretty well. So again, yeah, you're right. It is literally a copper document written backwards. They had to write every word, every letter backwards, from right to left. Normally, an Israeli or a Hebrew writes from right, no, from left to right. That's the way they had to write it, so that when they flipped the document over, you could read it from right to left, and they had to do it all backwards.
I think that's an incredible skill right there, to be able to do
Yeah,
that
it's
in a hurry. That's it speaks volumes about them and their. But so here we have it. So again, it was found in a cave, and you have this picture of the caves behind me. But wasn't it in a fake cave? So they were in archaeologically kind of surveying a cave, and then they noticed that there was a possible something behind on the back wall of the cave, right? And they kind of pressed
yeah.
it and found on
Apparently,
a table, actually, like it was a room back there.
yeah, it was actually, I think, what happened was the roof had collapsed, and it formed a false wall. And they happened. I mean, they were just, within an hour, they were going to be closing up and giving up on their researches for any more Dead Sea Scrolls. And they just happened to see it just before they decided to close up the operation for the year. And there it was behind a false wall. Again, whether it was a collapsed or they built, I don't know for sure. But it was on at a small little perch, shelf of dirt that they found it on. And there are pictures of it. You can go online and see it. It's a black and white picture, but you can tell that it had been sitting there for centuries.
Right. Well, I know that when I have a little phrase just as an aside that, Elohim, he's never late. Well, he's not often early, but he's never late. So that's
Right.
perfect. I mean, 1 hour before the dig ends. That's so
Exactly.
classic. But so they find the scroll, and it took them quite a bit to open it. It was quite a hairy ordeal because it's 2000. Well, it could be even old. I mean, it could be technically 2,500 years. If it really is from the time of 2600 from Jeremiah, correct? So they had to have come up with a plan to open it up and kind of get at it, and that was a little tricky, but they did that, right, in about
1952 is whenever they found the scroll. And it was about 2,400 years since the scroll had actually been hidden.
Right.
And they opened that area up and got to the scroll, thank goodness. And it's one of the few scrolls that were actually found by a trained and legitimate team. Otherwise, most of the scrolls had been found by Bedouins.
Right.
Those Bedouins, they would take them, they sell them on the black market, and of course, they're surviving out there in the wilderness. So that's one of the ways that they could survive, is find ancient documents like that and then take them to an antiquities dealer and sell them on the black market and make a lot of money off of them. To us, it wouldn't have been a lot of money, but to them, it was a lot.
Right. Right. So this whole thing has the hand of, Elohim on it. So now let's just put Qumran on the map. Just quickly give us the geography here, because you have Jerusalem, Qumran, the Valley of Achor, and Mount Nebo. Those are kind of all playing into this. So just give a quick geography for everyone. Like even today, like even not even today, because I hear it's 55 minutes by car, but if you were walking, I mean, if you were in Jerusalem and you were going to take even a camel, I would admit, how long do you think it would take to get to Qumran and then from Jerusalem?
From Jerusalem, walking or driving?
Well, back in the day, they don't have their cars, so let's say it's a camel or walking.
Well, it's interesting that you'd bring that up because you ever heard of Joseph Good?
Yes.
Joe Good and I were talking yesterday. We talk frequently about about Qumran and the Copper Scroll and the temple artifacts because he's real involved in the temple, and so am I. Well, he asked me that same question because we were looking. There's a possibility. I'm going to just throw this in here real quick to lead up to how long it takes to get from Jerusalem to Qumran. There's a possibility that the cliff there at Qumran, on the very south end of Qumran, is the one where they pushed the Day of Atonement goat off.
Makes sense.
Makes perfect sense.
Makes perfect
sense.
Well,
now, he was asking me, well, Jim, how long does it take to get from Qumran to Jerusalem or vice versa? So I did the math on it real quick. The distance is about 13 miles. So it was about 6 hours, 6.5 hours from Jerusalem to Qumran, walking at a normal pace. Now that's plus or minus, 45 minutes, 30 minutes, something like that. But I would say between 6 and 7 hours to get to Qumran.
Okay. Well, I mean, doable.
Doable. Of course. Yeah. In one day, you could walk it pretty easily.
Right. Now, let me just flip to the modern day again. A question is on Qumran. Where is it geographically in Israel today? It's on the West Bank. Now, what makes, and also you should just kind of tell we know the Copper Scroll now. What is the Copper Scroll project? And then how are you helped or hindered by its location and some of the politics today?
Well, the politics are the biggest hindrance. I think we'd have dug them up in 2009 had it not been for the politics. And there's a lot of jealousy in on the archaeological world. I mean, you can watch it. Okay. Oh my gosh, there is huge jealousy. There's a lot of conflict, and sometimes I think they like the conflict or the arguments to sell more books, and that's that's how they survive. So I guess, I mean, I don't like it, but maybe they do. Yeah, the biggest problem though is politics. If we were to find massive amounts of treasures at Qumran, Qumran is on the west side of the Dead Sea, and if your audience will just picture that, the top of the Dead Sea up to the north, and Qumran is about I don't know, about 4 miles, 3 miles maybe from the northern end, where you turn there at Highway 1 onto Highway 90. It's about 4 miles down the road, not very far at all. And it's up on a perch. It's like on a plateau where the ruins are at. You see in the picture behind you, it shows the cave 4. Well, the top of that area is the top of is the same level that Qumran the ruins are on. You just walk around from the top. Mm-hmm. It's easy. It's a simple little walk around there to go right into the ruins. But it's a small valley there that you've got or wadi is more accurate. Mm-hmm. You walk around there to get to Qumran. So it's in an area that is very accessible. Today it's a very modern facility there for selling tourist trinkets and that sort of thing, and meals there. But the West Bank is where it's at. It's about 13 miles, straight line distance from the front gate of Jerusalem, the beautiful gate to Qumran, and I really believe that there is a very good possibility that Qumran was where they pushed the Day of Atonement goat off. But we'll get more into that here in just a little bit.
Right. So let's go back in time, back to Jeremiah. So I know, the text, there's a principle that, two witnesses, and it has to be two witnesses. And if there is discrepancy, maybe a contradiction, or a parent doesn't seem to reconcile, you get a third witness in the text. But this thing with the copper scroll, we do have, it is in Maccabees, it is in Baruch, I believe it's mentioned.
Yeah.
Those are two witnesses. It in the book you mentioned by Rabbi Hertz. He wrote a book called The Valley of the Kings, and it was sort of
Naphtali
a
Hertz.
compilation of a lot of midrash. And this was known. This story of the treasure being buried has been being carried forward, especially in the mystical traditions within Judaism. So there is quite a bit. If you want to, I think I counted up at least 4 or 5 definite, clear allusions, and then outright verses that say that this is Jeremiah when the Babylonians were bearing down on them, buried the treasure. So that's, that's pretty good evidence to me. So then back to Qumran, and when I started reading the Dead Sea Scrolls, you have so much scholarly debate about it all. And I just put a lot of the time the scholars right at arm's length a little bit. But to me, it's like it's a no-brainer. We're talking about Jeremiah, one of the holiest prophets, who did have a call on his life, and he had this was part of his call, his ministry, protecting the implements from the first temple. So let's make that a given. So let's go into you. I know that you have mentioned that you believe that Qumran is, how do you put it? The place of the prophets. It is the home of the prophets and of the Melchizedek priesthood. And that's something I'd really like to flush out a little bit, because, again, when we found this, so like I said, I study a lot, you study a lot of my listeners, I'm sure, the people, the parties that were involved in the first century, you had the Essenes, and you had the Romans, and then you had the Sadducees, and you had the Pharisees. And most people, I understand that you can't paint with too broad of brushes. We had 2 schools of Pharisees. You had the school of Shammai and the school of Hillel, and they're very different in their outlook, and even when Yeshua interacted. So let's go back to the first century. Let's go back first of all to Jeremiah's time, if the school of the prophets. So flesh out for me what you mean when you say that. We know there were 5. The text says 5 prophets: Haggai, Zechariah. I had it written somewhere that were involved in this. And in the scroll, there's 5 different sets of handwriting, right? Or is it 4?
Yeah, there's 5 different handwriting.
So there's just so many collaborating witnesses here. So what do you mean when you say the school of the prophets, the home of the prophets?
Well, the gentleman that I worked with when we did the excavation in 2009, it was a very shallow, very cursory type of excavation. But I don't believe it was the archaeologist's fault. I believe it was some other people here in the United States that actually interfered and caused us to stop doing the excavation. Had we gone deeper, I think we would definitely have found something. But some of the things that I'll tell you what. Let me ask you this. Can you say your question one more time?
Well, okay. So how do you see Qumran? You mentioned that you considered it to be the home of the prophets.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yep.
And then how this fits in, because there's this whole, for people, you have this dichotomy between the Essenes and the temple in Jerusalem. There's definitely 2 things going on, 2 camps, so to speak, with 2, I won't say different ideologies, but there definitely is something going on. So who do you think was at Qumran? It's not a pottery manufacturer. It wasn't a
right, and that's where I was going with that earlier. Right. Is the 2 men that the chief archaeologist and the head man over the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, they sat down and talked with me, and they are both of the opinion that it was a pottery factory. It's not at all. With all respect to them, I think they were sincere. I think that's what they really believed. But it's not, guys. Qumran is, I absolutely believe it was the home of the prophets, the home of the Melchizedek order. I think that is where your prophets were coming out of. A lot of times when you would hear of a prophet coming out of the wilderness, I think that's where they were coming from, and they would head for Jerusalem, and they would get in the face of the king or the priest or the prophets at the temple and say, "Hey guys, this. Here's the golden rule. I'm holding it right here in front of you, and you're not doing things correctly." So I think it was far more than just a place to make salt, and they did definitely made pottery there. They definitely produced salt there. There's no doubt, and
So
but
close.
it's far more than that. And I mean, I think that's exactly one of the reasons. And nobody knew this until I accidentally stumbled onto it. That Qumran is an upside down, kind of like a mirror image of Jerusalem. You can take the points, the major points. Now the buildings and all that stuff, they don't match up with Jerusalem. But you take the exterior walls and you take every point that is identified in the copper scroll around the edges, and all of them, the fountain, the double entry mikvah, which represents a pool of Siloam, the water system, and I'm going counterclockwise around the area of Jerusalem and Qumran. Once you flip it upside down and match it up to Jerusalem, the temple, the sheep's gate, the woman's house, the women's tower, or the women's gate, all these things match up, and that is just not a coincidence. So again, that leads me right back to believe that it was far more than that. And if you'll think about it, when is the last time frame in the scripture that you see any mention of the Ark of the Covenant actually being in possession of the people of Israel? Well, that's at the time of Josiah, King Josiah. Well, guess what? Whenever Josiah was king, Jeremiah was a very young prophet at the time, like 14, 13, 12, 13 years old, somewhere in there. And I could look it up and tell you, but there's all of these clues that you've been mentioning. You're right. There's so much there that points to the Jeremiah time frame that it's hard to deny. I mean, you can deny it and you can cover your head and pretend like it's not there, but it is. It's all there. So again, Qumran was much more than a pottery factory or a salt producing plant.
Yeah, and I don't believe any. I mean, I think those who have a spiritual understanding, I mean, you got to say the natural man doesn't understand. I mean, spiritually, I think most people get it. This is definitely a holy. I mean, and they did more than just copy text too. Then, so
Yes.
it was so you come, because I know this reading the mystical works, the wilderness is a code word for Qumran, all right, for that area. So even when John the Baptist comes out of the wilderness, this is what it's saying.
Exactly.
Yeshua, even before he was presented, they were coming from somewhere. Now, I also want to just say there is a correlation, if I to in northern Israel, Mount Carmel. I mean, there seems to be, I mean, people who study this, these scenes did have different locations. So, but if this truly was sort of a headquarters and a place to really keep the text, they would have obviously a full library and keeping like the works of Haggai. My understanding to a lot of these scrolls, there's so much we don't have. There's just so much that we don't have. But like for the prophets, like let's say Jeremiah, so Isaiah lived before him, and they would have had all the oracles of Isaiah. My understanding is a prophet would, if a current king was doing something, they would consult the oracles of previous prophets and see what was said, and then they would go and confront the king or something. Or they had this, like, they just had this wealth of material. They had a wealth of recording of everything that any of the prophets had ever said. I always say we kind of our cliff, we get the Bible with the cliff notes kind of redacted, but they just had everything. That's why they found so many, in my opinion, so many different kinds of texts at Qumran. But so how do you see, then we'll bring in the Melchizedek factor, this priesthood, because we have the book of Hebrews and it mentions Yeshua is now of the order of Melchizedek. And now we know we have in the temple, you have a Kohanim from Aaron, a whole Levite and Kohanim. So what's the difference in your mind And how do you see these two priesthoods coexisting, and what is their relationship?
The two priesthoods have always existed. At least, certainly. Well, let me just put it this way. Let's start with Moses. I think Moses was one of the certainly one of the Melchizedeks, one of the people at that time frame. Maybe not the Melchizedek at that time, but I'll explain that in just a minute. Is this that it was happening then? There was a dedication. I mean, throughout the scripture, or in scripture, especially the Tanakh, it talks about, the firstborn son is to be dedicated to God. Well, the dedication was not just something, well, let's take him and let's do a baptism and take him home. That's not it. Once they were dedicated to God, and they would actually take them and raise them up in the way that they should go, and so that they would not depart from it. They would take them to certainly to Qumran. It even talks about it in the Qumran text, that they would raise up young men there.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what was going on, is they were raising them up to be part of the Melchizedek priesthood. And that went all the way down through. In the priests, or the priesthood of Melchizedek, were the prophets. And the priesthood of Levi, that was plan B. Remember, then Israel was always supposed to be a nation of priests. And even in the book of the Revelation, it talks about, at the end of days, we're going to have each tribe will have 12,000 men, virgins, young men that are pure and holy, that would be part of a priesthood. Well, what priesthood do you think they're talking about? Because the Levitical priesthood tells you who are the only ones that are authorized to be part of the Levitical priesthood. That is the tribe of Levi, from the tribe of Levi. So now you've got all of the tribes that are going to be supplying priests at the time of, mentioned in the book of the Revelation. So there's far more to it than just the Levites. And this was probably not going to go well until they start studying some of the Dead Sea Scrolls. And I believe a lot of the people in Israel, the Kohanim, are already familiar with this and aware of this. But
Now,
those two priesthoods work together.
I'm sorry, but you mentioned that they should start studying. Who's the they?
All of us. All of us should start studying, getting ready for the Melchizedek priesthood being restored again.
Right.
And everybody needs to get off of their high horses and sit down and look each other in the eye and say, okay, we're all very, very new at this. Let's work together as brothers. Let's work together and let's try to figure this out. This includes not only my Jewish brothers and the ones that are turning back to Torah. I think everyone needs to sit down and we need to admit to each other, okay, I don't know everything, but I bet you and I could sit down and we can figure out a lot more if we work together. And that's going to be one of the issues that I'm sure is going to come up at some point. We have to work together. And there's a lot of anti-Semitism that is out there, even amongst the Christians. And guys, with all due respect to my Christian brothers, that's got to stop. We have to work together. And anyway, I got kind of off subject, but it's part of the process.
No, this is something that I kind of rant about a lot on my channel a little bit. My favorite verse is from Isaiah 11:13. It talks about that the jealousy of Ephraim will depart, and those who harass Judah will be cut off. It says Ephraim will not be jealous of Judah, and Judah will not harass Ephraim. I mean, let me put it this way. I believe that there's a core group of people from both houses that are beginning to understand there's something way bigger has been going on, and we can dialogue.
Yes.
That's happening. Now, we know Judah as a nation does not receive Messiah ben, Joseph, I call Yeshua. Mm-hmm. Will we, as quote unquote, the Christians, be able to recognize Messiah ben David when he comes? That's another, so we need to really dialogue. And I think I think the Copper Scroll's playing into this, where your whole attitude, Jim, and let me say, of that you have the ear now, you should tell me, of of a lot of the rabbis, a lot of the Knesset, some people, deep rabbinic people in Israel that are like, and I think you even have it recorded on tape, like, we think he did it. We think he's got it. So here's an Ephraimite, so to speak, coming out of the woodwork who is all of a sudden cracking the code from Qumran. I just think more and more these kind of things are going to be happening where we can do collaboration. But, you know, so this is an exciting time. And, you know, maybe not everybody will get involved, but I think you and I are on the same page, the two houses, that the reunification, this is all playing into the reunification. But back to the Melchizedek priesthood, because this is, I just want to interject one thing for you to comment, in the sense, because with the Dead Sea Scrolls, that, you know, they have these really enigmatic scrolls called, you know, the Melchizedek, there's the Melchizedek scroll, or, you know, and they have concepts in them that are very new to, let's say, the evangelical mind. But do you think, and then we have the book of Hebrews that is telling us point blank that Yeshua is of the Melchizedek order, and that is not familiar verbiage, really, to so I guess this is my question, though. In the Zohar, which I do a lot of reading in, you know, in the mystical text, and there is this concept that that Melchizedek, okay, so when you found the map of Jerusalem that kind of paralleled Qumran, and it was upside down, and then you flip it over, there's this whole, we know that there's a pattern, as above, so below. So even we know the temple, Moshe was told to make it as a copy of a pattern that's in heaven. So there's this definite mirror image thing going on between heaven and earth. So I was recently reading in the Zohar, and it talks about how they talk about, because they're different, they're the king of Salem versus the Melchizedek king. So there's two kind of things going on. In other words, they say that one represents the earthly representative of that priesthood, the king of Salem. So if Yeshua says, who came down from heaven, that he is of the heavenly priesthood. So in other words, Melchizedek is sort of the heavenly priesthood. And what Melchizedek, because is, so let's say Shem, which I think is a pretty clear, that it's a title. First of all, Melchizedek is a title. It's an office.
Absolutely. I believe that as well.
So many people can have that office, and that of the firstborns, it's an office for the firstborn. And we know that before the Levitical, it always went through the firstborn, from Adam to Enoch to Shem, and even to Abraham, you could say that they were Melchizedek priests. Then you have this whole thing changing up a little bit, where you have more of a Levitical, you know, for the temple, I think, when they were stationary, and they were getting ready for the future, the division of the tribes, you know. So there was a lot that probably Hashem was getting ready for. But my question was, do you think you could see this thing where we who are the born again, and like that there is going to be a priesthood, that this is a heavenly order of priests who are versus a literal physical priesthood? Does that make sense?
Well, yeah, it does, but it was also very literal. The Melchizedek order is very literal priesthood, and there was more than just one man that was the priest. I mean, there were you know, at the time of Yeshua, there was probably 5,000. And how many of them were firstborns that were more than just the congregation? I can't tell you that, but there was at least 5,000 at the time of Yeshua. And it talks about it in the book of Josephus, and it talks about it in other places. And even Yeshua mentions it. You know, well, he doesn't mention it, but it talks about how many people were there with him when he was feeding the multitude.
And so go back to what is the that so you're saying these 5,000 were known as priests after the order of Melchizedek,
right?
So it really was known at the time. The Essenes had within their ranks, there was an order of Melchizedek, a functioning firstborn priesthood,
right.
All right. So what do you think their relationship was with the high priest? So we have
not good.
Okay, so we can see that from the text.
Right.
So going back, so let me ask you then, so in your opinion, who do you think, and there does seem to be a lot of bad blood, that between this teacher of righteousness and then this spouting liar or the wicked priest, these names. There's never a name that we can, but just this
Yeah,
back.
there are names who they are. I can tell you who they were.
Okay, go for it.
The wicked priest was Pashur, and the liar, the man of lies, was Hananiah, the guy that broke the yoke off of Jeremiah's off of his back. Remember, Jeremiah had a yoke on him, and Hananiah took it off, broke the yoke off. Well, that's who these guys were. You can see it in Jeremiah, how many times he talks about the liar and how much the liar is talked about in the book, in the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Right.
And it's very clear who it was. And Jeremiah played the role of course, the teacher of righteousness. Now, there's going to be scholars out there that argue with me. I don't care. They can argue all they want to. There's so much evidence that it's ridiculous not to be able to see it. So
then
go ahead with your question now.
All right, so you're putting the spotting liar and back in the time of Jeremiah.
Mm-hmm.
So then, okay, so let's take the title, let's say, of the teacher of righteousness. That mm-hmm. was a position held by Melchizedek in the Essene priesthood.
Right.
All right. And then there's another title when John the Baptist. So do you think, just to get this, so you do not think that John the Baptist was, because his father, Zacharias, who was a temple priest.
Was he?
Did you ask me, was he?
Yep. Was he? Was he really?
That's what is in some literature or some of the text, right?
Yeah. And I do too. I believe he was. But what you got to remember too is that even, I'll explain why I'm going here. James, the brother of Jesus, Yeshua, he would go to the temple and he would enter into the holy place. And it talks about it in some of the ancient writings.
Right, he does.
What was he doing there? If he was he was from the tribe of Judah, and he's also called James the Just, which means the righteous. Right. James the righteous one, Zadik. So now here he is doing things that I believe he took over after Yeshua ascended.
Right. Okay, so here he is. They call him the head of the Jerusalem church. So what you just said, to recap, if I heard you, so you think James, yes, because he did go into the Holy of Holies, he did sort of function like a high priest, but technically he was not a high priest, right?
What? Here's the thing.
This is
here's the argument. In the Talmud, it talks about, and guys, don't throw the Talmud out with the baby with the bathwater.
Right.
There's a lot of really good stuff in there that confirms a lot of things that we believe. So don't throw it out and ignore it and say it's some kind of evil document, because it's not. There's teachings in there. For example, are you familiar with the Nazarite vow?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. There's an argument in there about who is more holy. Is it the average Nazarite, or is it the Kohen HaGadol, the high priest? Who is more holy? Well, why would they be arguing that? It's because the requirements for a high priest to enter into the holy place, the most holy, is he's got to abstain from alcohol. He's got to abstain from a lot of things, the same things that a Nazarite would have to abstain from, but the Nazarite does it the entire time he's under his vow, whether it's a Nazarite for life, a life Nazarite, or a Nazarite that is only for 30 days. There's a holiness there that is maintained by the Nazarites that is not being done by the high priesthood. And it's not that they're doing anything wrong. It's just that they're not required. The high priest is not required unless on the Day of Atonement, prior to that, he gets ready to go into the Holy of Holies, then he has to reach a level of a standard Nazarite. Do you see what I'm saying? So now you've got a group of men that are running around in kittles all the time. Well, what does the high priest wear when he enters into the Holy of Holies? Well, he doesn't wear all the regalia, all the stones on his chest. He wears a simple kittle, which is a white linen garment. as he enters in. And that's the whole thing with the guys at Qumran. They wore these things all the time. It's because it was like they were always ready to enter in. They were always ready to proceed past the first veil and the second veil. They maintained a level of holiness that is unbelievable, even to this day. It's just amazing what they did.
But now that, you mean, because that's a vow that you could take, do you think that that was only available to the firstborns, the Nazarite? Because
No.
in the order of Melchizedek, but I mean, that's something that someone could take. But in terms of part of the order of Melchizedek, you would have to be a firstborn.
It is my belief, yes, that the order of Melchizedek were all Nazarites.
Right. Living at that level of holiness, so to speak, that was part of the deal. You had to.
Yeah.
So then then there is no dialogue or diatribe going on at the time of Yeshua or even afterwards with the spouting liar and the teacher of righteousness. You know, people put that all, I mean, I've heard everything. I've heard Paul is the spouting liar. I'm sure.
Oh, yeah.
You're out there saying that.
Yeah, I mean, there was.
I mean, all over the place. But you're putting it back in Jeremiah's time with
that particular document, the documents of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Yeah, that was during the time of Jeremiah. Now, did it happen again with Yeshua? Of course it did. Did it happen? It's happened several times, but the one that is most obvious and the biggest battle between the teacher of righteousness and the liar and Pasher, the wicked priest, that's very obvious. I mean, it's all over the place in there.
Right. Now, do you have a blog? Do you have something online where you kind of flush that out a little bit more? Is it
No, I don't have stuff to sell. I got nothing against that. For me, I'm very uncomfortable about selling things or selling what I'm learning. I want to do this. I want to give it to people like yourself and who's willing to listen. I want to give it to them because this is something precious. Not just the copper scroll, but the other things. I believe that God has allowed me to see some things that I feel very uncomfortable about selling. But so anyway, that's where I stand on that.
That's very commendable, and that's very Nazarite. So let me just ask you back to, so what's developing, listening to your scenario, how you're saying it, is these two priesthoods functioning side by side. I mean, we can't go into all tonight. Did the Essenes believe in the animal sacrifices? Did they not? But I mean, it's the 100, let's just shift to Revelation. And again, we have this 144,000, these very cryptic, let me just back to your comment about the Talmud. And again, I agree with you. We cannot throw at any of Judah's writings. Because first of all,
silly.
They're the only ones who kept him in the house. I look at us Ephraimites. What did we do? We didn't even take our Bible with us.
There you go. Yeah.
So, I mean, if it wasn't for Judah keeping these texts, all of these writings, whether you agree with, we would really be in a pickle. So they, as the older brother, I think they should be commended very highly. But the Talmud is like the Zohar, these other texts, very cryptic. They're very encrypted. And when you get to that level of scholarship, or when you're a Torah sage and you can read the Talmud and you're in discussion with, it's like almost a shorthand. That's why I think it trips people up a lot when they read the Talmud, because it's these little cryptic kind of almost sayings where they're putting together a lot of rabbis, different things with it's very hard to understand, but it's all almost like a shorthand code for them at their level. They know what they're talking about. I mean, you can get there. You just have to be very Torah and know the arguments, know what they're talking about almost ahead of time. So you can kind of cut right to the chase in a lot of their dialogue, so to speak. But back to this whole, so we possibly have these two priesthoods, but then, I mean, we know Moshe was told with Aaron, to make him a high priest and to start a whole lineage, a genealogical lineage of a priesthood for the temple and the temple worship. I mean, right, nobody would argue with that. That's pretty. So, but at the same time, then, because I have heard a lot of people say, and it seems that the order of Essenes is very ancient. It is
very ancient.
it's very ancient. And plus a lot of the writings that were found in Qumran, like the book of Enoch, they had a lot of writings. I mean, all of their writings that were, I one time I remember hearing Rachel Eller, and I'm sure you're familiar with her. She kind of said, when we found these texts, and so she said, these were writings that even we, the Jews, who think we have a handle on all the writings, we didn't even know these things existed. Like they were not even on our radar, which goes to show you, what do you think happened after maybe it's 70 AD, or what point Qumran was destroyed, the texts were lost, they were cut off as a group because you never hear of them again. They kind of disappear from the radar. What do you attribute that to? What do you think was going on?
At 70 AD, Qumran was already destroyed at that point. Qumran had been destroyed for since time of the Babylonian captivity. Well, they were actually living in holes in the ground out there. You can read about it in Josephus. You can read about it in Pliny, I believe, Philo, Pliny, that they were living out in holes in the ground out there. It wasn't like, and the reason they didn't rebuild Qumran, what do you think? It's because all the instructions on the Copper Scroll tells you from the destroyed, this destroyed place, from the rubble that remains, it tells you about this stuff. And if they were to have gone back in there and reconstructed Qumran, they wouldn't have had a lot of their clues that they needed to be able to find the implements that are there today.
Wow, I guess I wasn't as up to speed as I thought on your kind of. So you think that Qumran was not a habitable settlement of the time of Yeshua, John the Baptist?
It was. No, it was. It truly was. However, they may have repaired some of the synagogue or the places that they needed, but they didn't repair all of it, because had they repaired all of it, it would have
disturbed.
It would just totally disturb the clues that were needed to be able to find the treasures. But yes, I do believe they were functioning there. I do believe that there was in the area that they called Nazareth. I don't believe Nazareth existed at the time of Yeshua, but in that area of the Galilee, absolutely, there were Essenes. I'm going to just call them Essenes that were all over Israel at that time frame.
Right. So you know how I've read in some of the texts that when they were initiated, and this is something that I think, again, people need to get more comfortable, like with some of these words, like a word to be initiated. It's all over, like the Clementine literature. It's all over the text. I mean, it's just a concept that you become extremely knowledgeable and aware, and you just are very studied, and you become Torah sage, and you have that level of holiness, and you're on your way maybe to being a prophet, whatever. You're highly initiated. But do you think that at Qumran, they would give him an apron and they would give him a shovel? I've heard this, but now sometimes I know how to encrypt it. So to me, the shovel now, it's almost symbolic of that they were keepers of the dig, that they knew if you got to that level, there has to be some. I always knew that the scenes were called keepers of the secrets. So now when I heard it, I'm thinking, oh man, that puts a whole new level, a whole new spin on keepers of the secret. So do you think that these prophets, these people, even John, you should knew what was sitting in Qumran?
No, I don't. No. I don't think. Maybe the Melchizedeks, probably the Melchizedeks did know. Probably Yeshua knew. Probably John the Baptist knew, but I can't say for sure. But the shovel that they gave them wasn't to go out and extract and dig up gold.
Maccabees.
Oh, I lost you. It's completely, if you can hear me, it completely locked up whenever you said Maccabees.
Okay, so you're saying, I mean, they would have had Maccabees in some of these witnesses. So I'm just saying, and it seemed, if it was from Jeremiah, I would imagine they knew this story very well. I would imagine.
Yeah.
But So yes, and we know that there were many, in, like I agree, many Essene communities. They had a very tight knit group, and that like Nazareth was more of an Essene community, you know, from the. So if he, so back to this idea, if he and John the Baptist were cousins, and this is they're of a clan, and most of them are Essene. So back to just to finish flushing this out. You don't think Zechariah, the father of John the Baptist, was a temple priest? He was in the temple. Where do you see that happening then? That whole.
No, I didn't. If I'm sounded like I was playing, no, I didn't mean to do that. I do believe that he was a Levitical priest. His father certainly was, but they were Levitical priests could also be part of the Qumran community as Nazarites, and I believe John was without a doubt a Nazarite, and Yeshua too, for all that matters. But I absolutely believe that, yeah, he was a Levitical priest. It even talks about it in the Dead Sea Scrolls, that there were two prophets or two anointed ones, messiahs, that were coming.
Right.
And one was the priesthood of Aaron, and the other one was the Messiah of Israel, which was very obviously Yeshua.
But do you see Yeshua also fulfilling that role as the priest of Aaron, as a Melchizedek? Oh no, that would be a Levitical.
It's Levitical. Yeah.
Right. So yes. So let me ask you a question. Just jump up to Paul. So let's just talk about Paul for a second. And he has this major. He's highly Pharisaical, but he has this major conversion, and he goes out into the wilderness. You know, do you think he went to Qumran, or do you think he had an Essene connection and was kind of brought up to speed, learned the mysteries and all of that?
No, I don't think so. The reason being is because he was only there for 3 years. And 3 years was the initiation period. You had to be 3 years. He either didn't make it, couldn't handle that level of holiness of purity. And I don't mean this ugly towards him. I'm just saying that for some reason he dropped out. And what it was, I can't tell you. But I mean, even he took a Nazarite's vow. So the probability that he was associated with them is high, but I don't think he stayed with them for very long. Because all that I can remember, and that maybe just me at this point, he was only there with them for 3 years, and he argued with King Agrippa about, I didn't do this, I didn't do that, I didn't do this, but he says, but I was a member of the way, which is one of the very prominent names of the men of the Essenes, and I'll use that as a generic term. The way, the sons of light, the brethren, and people call each other brothers today, and they don't even know why. It's because of the Melchizedek order, Melchizedek priesthood. They were brothers. Once they were adopted into that family at Qumran, there was the teacher of righteousness at that point was their father, acted as their father, earthly father at that point. That's why Yeshua, he never said anything about, well, whenever his mother came to see him, he said, "Who's my family? Who's my brothers? My brothers and sisters? It's here. It's you. You're my family." He didn't disown his mother, but he made them understand that they were a family, and a family of the Melchizedek order. So I'll leave it at that.
Well, let's see. Back to, why do you think, again? So, okay, I can see your point about Jeremiah, that Qumran was destroyed by the Babylonians, basically.
Yeah.
Of course, couldn't they have disturbed a lot of, made it into rubble? Well, I mean, I could see, couldn't they have made a mess of things a little bit? All right. And then you say it was never totally rebuilt per se. It was just sort of, all right. So, but at the time, we know that these scenes dropped off of history. You have your quotes from just until the Dead Sea Scrolls were found again. You had a quote from Josephus, a little bit from Philo, a couple other mentions by historians, but that was about it. There was not a lot. They were not a large group that people really knew about. So what happened? How do you explain that? They kind of just dropped off. Well, we know a lot about Christianity. We know a lot about, Judaism. we didn't know anything about these scenes really until 1948.
Well, actually, all of Christianity at the time of Yeshua were Essenes.
Right.
That's who they were. It's not that they dropped off. It's what happened was they went into diaspora with everybody else. Is there a group of men that remained holy and pure? I believe so. Who they are, I believe they're probably very what would be considered mystical, and I don't mean Madonna Kabbalah kind of stuff. They were very mystical. They were very dedicated, and very few. I mean, for one thing, they would need to be Nazarites, and there are very, very few Nazarites in Israel at this time, and so or across the world. There's very few that are Nazir. So where they went into diaspora with all of the Jewish people, um, including Judah, Benjamin, and the Levitical priesthood. Were the only ones that were identifiable, and I think they went into the diaspora with everybody else, and they kind of got lost with time. And I think that's why that there's going to be a reconstruction of the Melchizedek order at the end of days.
So bringing back around full circle. So how do you interpret that verse in Revelation on the 144,000?
That's it. I think that's the
Yes.
restoration of the Melchizedek order. 12,000 for each one of the tribes. So that is what it was supposed to always been, was a nation of priests, not a family of priests, but a nation of priests. And I think that is what is happening, is a restoration of that order.
So do you think that this happens, that this Melchizedek order, do you think it's going to take Yeshua coming, the Mashiach, to reestablish it and to kind of pick out of the nations who these 144 are? Or do you?
Yeah, can it be done by DNA?
Oh, how could
I don't know. I would think that it would be possible at some point if they can identify a pure line of Ephraimites, pure line of Naphtali, name all the tribes. If you can find them all, then yeah, then they could do that. But probably, in some supernatural spiritual way, the Messiah, is he the one that's going to be able to identify these people? It's going to be a long day sitting around trying to find 144,000, but think of it.
Well,
The requirements are what? They have to be male for one, and two, they have to be holy and pure, and they have to be virgins. So, and at that time, I'm telling you, they will probably be Nazarites again.
right. Well, we will. Everybody's kind of waiting on the edge of their seat to see how this unfolds. And this is back to the Copper Scroll. This is why this is such an interesting piece of the puzzle, because the third temple. Let's just kind of go delve into the third temple for a second. So, because there's tremendous push and for to build a third temple. Most people are aware of the Temple Institute, which has just about everything ready to go. Correct. So
No, they don't. They've got a lot of stuff that's prepared, and what people don't understand is the guys at the Temple Institute, they're not practicing to do service in the temple per se. What they're practicing to do services in is a tabernacle. That's what they use whenever they practice. Now, will that get you ready? Yeah, it would, to a very high level. But ultimately, I mean, once they switch to a temple, then it's going to have to be, retrained, and they have to be training the entire time, getting ready for the rebuilding of the temple.
So we're all probably agreed that do you believe that there will be a third temple built or in operation before Mashiach returns? We know there will
I can't say that, but I think it's possible. Yes.
Yeah, you don't have to be dogmatic per se, but it seems that there is something going on.
Without a doubt. Yeah.
You believe in this, this man of lawlessness, some whatever you want to call him, and figure, Amaryllis coming in and desecrating this temple, or profaning it, setting himself up.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, those are
Yeah, people, a few people, not as many as you might think. They have come to me and said, "Oh, Jimmy, you're getting stuff ready for the Antichrist." Well, no, I'm not. That's ridiculous. Um, these things these things are for the bride. These One of the rabbis told me this, and it made so much sense to me when he said it. He said, these implements, all this gold and silver, all these dishes and pots and pans, this is the dowry for the coming bride. It's not for the Antichrist, for goodness sakes. um, in everybody in your audience, let's say that there's one of them out there saying, oh my goodness, he's getting ready for the Antichrist. Well, here's the deal. At one point, you were not a clean, I was not a clean individual. Um, and they talk about we are the house of the Holy Spirit. We are the temple, if you will. Well, the temple has to be cleansed, and everyone that that was accepted and moved into this a level of holiness, that's they were cleaning their temple. And at that time, before that temple, our temples were cleansed. We were not. There were spirits of different kinds going in and out of our lives that created havoc for us. And it wasn't until we accepted and allowed the Spirit into our lives that we became holy. Well, that's the same thing that's happening with the Antichrist. He wants to stop the daily sacrifices. If it's an evil thing to have the sacrifices, then why is he stopping it? He would want, yeah, let's have more sacrifice. Let's do the evil stuff. But that's not what's happening, guys. That's one of the things I've learned since I began studying from a Hebrew perspective. These sacrifices were not the unclean, horrible, sloppy, bloody mess that everybody taught me as when I was in church.
Right. They were
It's
very,
not at all. It's a very pure, very holy, and a very clean operation. It is far more clean than any of the butchers that we have today in the United States. I promise you, it was a very perfect operation. So to claim that these things are going to go to the Antichrist, let's say if he stopped the sacrifices, these things are not going to go to him. Ultimately, it will be used by God for what God wants them to be used for. So I think it's silly that people think these things. They always got to try to find something wrong with a new revelation.
well, I agree, and there's a lot of sensationalism surrounding all of this, and maybe not enough. You're right. Serious scholarship or serious, well, whatever. Let me ask you a question. Now, I have this theory that I have been brewing and has been brewing in my mind because, and we talked about this quick. I was going to ask you, do you feel that there's a dark side to everything? So, do you feel even when you're in Israel and trying to expose this temple treasure, which is worth potentially billions, right?
Hmm.
That there's some shady characters around, that we have some, there's all
Hmm.
this type of Illuminati, the Freemasons, whatever you want to call these secret societies that might have nefarious. Uh, do you feel that you have cross currents or that there's people with different intentions?
Oh
Uh,
gosh, yes. Yeah, I've ran up to them from the very beginning. People wanting nothing more than to go get the gold and silver, and what can I get out of this money wise? Guys, if that's what you want, then get out of my way. I don't want anything to do with you, because this is not about money. This is not about gold and silver. That's just kosher metal to be used by God for God's intentions. That's not what this is for. It just burns me up that people, they think about themselves rather than the big picture, about the people, about the children, about our children and our grandchildren growing up in a world run and ruled by a holy king. That is my goal. Restore these items to it so we can get back to what it was always supposed to have been. So yeah, are there people out there? Oh, you betcha. And I'm on watch every single day. What are their motives? Why are they doing this? And that's one of the reasons I don't like to take sell stuff. I just don't like doing that, especially the knowledge that well, we've got a book out there, but that book is not the knowledge that I've gained, and that's not the knowledge that you're getting tonight. I'm telling you about the Jimmy Barfield story. That's the last thing I want to talk to you about. What I want to talk to you about is what's coming, the holy things and the potential of what's coming for our lives in the near future.
Right. And as you mentioned that book, I should just say that you have sort of sometimes a co-pilot partner there. Shelley Neese, right? I said that right. Shelley Neese, right?
Yes.
Has written a book, which my husband and I, he read it in a day, basically, day and a half. On the Copper Scroll Project. She has written a book. So you could go to Amazon or Google this on Jim's kind of story here over 10 years. I mean, or it's a long period of time, everything that's happened, all the machinations behind the scenes, and a lot of research and everything. It's called The Copper Scroll by Shelley Neese. So that's a great read and gives a ton of information. I just want to put that plug in there for Shelley. But let me just ask you another, because I have this theory, that we have the second temple, we have a first temple, second temple, a third temple. Now they're all very prophetic in archetypes. I do a lot with, like I said, with it, that things have an archetypal understanding. So one meaning unity, the first temple you had. So if Jeremiah hid the artifacts from the first temple from the profane Babylonians, right? And I think in Maccabees or in Baruch it says, and it will be reserved for the righteous in the last days. Like nobody's going to get their hands on it. It is put away by Elohim with the help of angels and his prophets for the last days. So that's a pretty now. But the second temple, that from what I understand too, when they did the second temple, it didn't have any of the artifacts from the first temple. It didn't have the ark, didn't have the candelabra, didn't have the holy fire wasn't there, the holy anointing oil wasn't there, it didn't have the Ark of the Covenant in the Holy of Holies, it didn't have the priest, they didn't have the original priest. So a lot, basically they did not have, Jeremiah buried it and they had to start again. That's my understanding. Now, but there is all that when the second temple was destroyed, though, at that point with Herod's temple, it was a very wealthy temple. There was tons of gold. I mean, that temple was like, they could call it the Bank of the Mideast. I mean, it was one of the most wealthy money institutions in the Mideast. So there was a lot of wealth there. There was a lot of temple treasure there. There was another candelabra. We know that because it's shown in the Arc de Triomphe, in that that the Romans built, showing them taking all the treasure into Rome when they were conquered. So I have this theory that if the Antichrist is going to use anything in this temple, this isn't going to be the holy temple. I believe that there's two treasures out there, because when you really study this thing out, whatever's been going on with the Knights Templar, when they went to Jerusalem in the Crusades and all these, there is a boatload of treasure out there that, in my opinion, has been moving around amongst different secret societies, different groups. It's a lot of the backstory of our wars and different things. And, even the show Oak Island, there is so much intrigue on this second temple treasure that I would not be surprised if that's what gets brought out. I'm just saying this, Jim. I'm not in control. If this is how Hashem plays it out, this works for me. So I want to give you my scenario. I think that as an elect person, I would be really happy to know if you could do a dig or two to prove it's there, get some scanning over the surface to prove, there's Fort Knox underneath, so to speak, just so I was like, no. And then as the whole prophetic scenario unfolds, let the Antichrist, let the wicked, let whoever's motivations build a second temple and put in all the second temple. Because the word two, when you have an archetype, two is always disunity. It is it's separation, because the first temple was under the whole unified temple, the Tabernacle of David. The second temple never did unify the tribes. It never did unify. The third temple is the unifying temple. So I just think it's going to be a story. You cannot be able to write this, what's going to be coming down soon, because I don't know. I mean, maybe it is all going to come out and what's in Qumran, or maybe it's just going to be known it's there and preserved, and let the second temple treasure be used. Because biblically, number one, when this treasure is found, this is going to validate the Bible beyond it's done. the naysayers. It's done.
Mm-hmm.
We have the goods. So that puts all that to rest. But even if they bring out Second Temple treasure, that does a lot to give credibility to the Bible. So I don't know if that's a scenario that's playing out. That's the one that I currently would pick as being kind of interesting. But there is a lot of this in the Second Temple, what it didn't have versus what is in, according to the text. So let me ask you a question. The Ark of the Covenant and the Tent of Tabernacle, and I believe the altar of incense are specifically listed that were put, by the angel in Mount Nebo or on the way to Nebo. I know that there's some discussion on how you interpret that. So make a comment about where you think the Ark is and the tent of meeting.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the things that the Second Maccabees, if you want to take a shortcut to Qumran, you take the route that I talked about in the very beginning of your program. Is you head straight the same path that you would take the goat, the Azazel goat. And I'm not 100% sure on this. Joe Good and I are talking about it, and we want to have a good presentation to be able to give to whoever we need to make them aware that there is a possibility that the Day of Atonement goat was there. But back to the path goes right to Qumran, right past Qumran. You don't go, down Highway 1 all the way down to 90, which it takes you about, 30, 40 minutes, maybe longer to get there that route. Walking it is about 6 hours. But my point again is that you go right past Qumran. And depending on how you read Second Maccabees,
Right.
that they walked, they were on their way to Mount Nebo or they were at Mount Nebo. And what's important to me is not so much that I'm right about it, because I do believe that the Ark of the Covenant is there. But there's no way of knowing until we actually get out there and test. And the reason I say that is the cave that I've identified, where I believe and hope and pray that it is the first 3 locations on the Copper Scroll. They stop right. The third location is the cave. And the last 5 locations on the Copper Scroll they're in a straight line. Those first 3 in a straight line, okay. Last 5 are in a perfectly straight line that stop again right at the point of the cave where I believe that cave is at. And the description on the Copper Scroll is identical to the location of where this cave is at. Now, in Second Maccabees, it says that they sealed the cave up. I spoke with Rabbi Yehuda Glick, and he said, Jimmy, that makes perfect sense. He said, that location is awesome. And he said, here's why. He said, if I were them, he said, I would want to seal that cave up, meaning brick it up, or not bricks, with rocks, stones, stack them up there and mortar them in place and seal it, and then take plaster and plaster over and completely cover that and make it watertight. Well, guess what? When we were digging there, I saw plaster forming like shelves in the back, at the back where the cave, the top of the cave would be. And I talked to the archaeologist, but he said, no, that's natural. Well, baloney. I sent it off to a institute, a scientific laboratory, and they said that's more likely that it's man-made, and they gave a very long scientific explanation of why that was probably man-made mortar. And then I had another gentleman from Israel come out and take a look at it. He was an expert on making ancient mortar. Him and his family had studied it, and they did a lot of the work on Qumran, and certainly a lot of the work at Masada, and rebuilding whenever they rebuild, they want to use identical type mortar. And he looked at it with a handheld microscope, and he said, oh yeah, he said, this is man-made mortar. He recognized it right away. So why would these 2, the first 3, the last 5, and they come to a point and they peak right there, right over where the cave is at, where I believe the cave is at. The description
Right.
on the copper scroll matches it exactly.
Right.
And why would there be mortar there, man-made mortar that's about 375, 80 yards away from Qumran in the wilderness? Why would it be out there in a place that is so obscure?
Right.
Unless they were trying to seal this thing up, and inside of that cave, if the tabernacle is in there, they could take that tabernacle out, and probably the ashes of the red heifer will be in there as well, sealed and ready to go. And they could use those things, cleanse that tabernacle, and have it ready to start functioning. My guess, and it's a guess, guys, is within a month. They could have it up and operational and ready to go again. So, do we need a temple? We could be operating and doing what God had intended for us to do this entire time. And people say, well, Jesus was the last sacrifice. Well, yeah, he was. And guys, it's not about the sacrifices prior to Yeshua pointed to him. The sacrifices that they're going to be doing in the millennial kingdom point back to him and show, look at what he did. Look at how he did it now, how much he sacrificed. So there is far more to this story than the old time. Give me that old time religion. You got to go back past the old time religion and get into the religion that God had established for us. So I'll stop there.
No, it's true. It's the religion of our patriarchs. We have to go back to the ancient paths.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a whole army of people out there doing it. This is,
my goodness, yes.
And there's a lot of people who are taking chunks of this whole thing, so to speak. And I mean, you are a great example, Jim. I mean, who would have known? Now, I have to just say something quick because I don't know, I'm somewhere in publicly I was saying this because I get a little excited and talk fast. And I said, yeah, Jim Barfield, this guy, he was an arsonist. And I didn't. And then my husband said, you just called him an arsonist. I'm like, oh my gosh. No, just give people your background a little bit. You are an arson investigator.
Yes.
I apologize if you ever.
That's okay.
That's funny. But yeah, what makes you uniquely, you think, equipped for this of really deciphering this very encrypted code here at Qumran?
Well, I became an arson investigator, and I became a international investigator, internationally recognized, and Oklahoma and recognized me as Investigator of the Year. But I'm telling you, my investigative skills came from my Bible study.
Okay.
That's where I learned to do investigations, and how to investigate is you got to take a lot of pieces of the information and you got to put them together, and you come up with a thesis, or you come up with a basic idea, a basic plan, and all that information has to be submitted to the district attorney. The district attorney then looks at it and says, okay, yeah, we can do this. Yeah, you've got everything lined up. It's all in order. Well, that's what I did with the Copper Scroll. Is I took all the evidence, I put it into a report, in a report that the Israelis would recognize. I used the exact same format that they do. Whenever they did their format for Qumran, I used the exact same format, and that's what has won their hearts every single time. Is I would lay my research in front of them, and they would be looking at me like I was a crazy man, until I got to location number 4. Every single time I got to that location, they would just throw their hands up and say, oh my gosh, I see what you're talking about here. And Yitzhak Ma, I mean, Yuval Peleg, Sugar Dorfman, head of the Antiquities Authority, you name it. Go down the list, and I could give you a list of people that I've shown it to that have all said, at first they said, oh my gosh, this guy's a nut. And then 5 minutes later, they're going, okay, now we could do this. We can do this. Now they're my team. How that happens, right. I don't know.
Now, you are going back to Israel soon,
yes.
Right, for another kind of round of meetings and trying to keep going up a level, kicking this whole project up a notch. Anything you see that could really begin so your 2 main goals would be to be able to excavate and to be able to scan. Is that correct?
No, we've already done a scan of Qumran.
You don't need to do more? other locations?
No, if we do more, it needs to be done just prior to actual excavation. We've got plenty of scan evidence that there's something there.
Okay.
And that's what all I needed was I just wanted to prove that there's something there. And we've got plenty to do that. Now, is it absolutely 100% that, the scans it's not some kind of weird anomaly? It's possible, but all the weird anomalies are exactly where I thought there'd be treasure at. So
Right.
that's what makes it even a weirder anomaly, how the anomaly would be perfectly aligned with what, where I thought the treasures would be.
Right.
Now, what I'm wanting to do is I'm going to go over there, and Moshe Feiglin was the gentleman that went with me out at Qumran to do the scan, and it was under his authority as deputy speaker of the Knesset that we were able to scan it without getting into trouble. With his authority, it was not an issue.
Right. Right. Well, let me ask you this. Now we've really kind of been talking, and maybe should start to wind down a little bit. I have a couple questions. We've been having some people put some questions into the chat. Let me just kind of go through these really quick.
Sure.
And ask this. But we will all keep you in prayer, Jim, because I understand, and I think this is it's like, I just want to say, nobody could write this script. This has Hashem all over it in so many ways. But we'll see. This Kay, who works for the Most High, asked, has anyone talked about the dangers of touching the Ark of the Covenant, as people have died in the past just bumping into it? I mean, if you find the Ark, do you feel that you're going to have to, I don't know.
Yes, actually, I've made plans for that. The number 2 guy on the project, his name's Chris Knight. I'm going to give him the honor of going into that cave first.
Okay.
And looking around and checking things out. And if he comes out, I'm going in there with him. But yes, she's got a very, very important point. Is there are a lot of things that only a Gentile can touch. Jewish people are not authorized to touch it because for halakhic reasons.
Right.
However, there are things that I will not be able to touch, which one of them would be the Ark of the Covenant. But to answer her question, there are men that are quite capable that are Kohanim, and they're of the proper family to be able to go in there and actually retrieve that Ark of the Covenant. And if they're not of the right lineage, she's right, we could have a problem on our hands.
Right. Okay. Well, now I have another question from Amy. Amy wants to know, does the scroll speak to hidden locations outside of the Qumran site? Is there anything that you
No, all of them are within the ruins or just outside of the walls. I mean, immediately outside of the walls, if they're outside of the walls at all. The only one that is not within the ruins, and Qumran is a very small area. It's probably 1/4 the size of a city block. So it's pretty small. And the only ones are location number 3 and location number 57 on my research. Location number 3 is actually talks about the ephod, the breastplate of the high priest, being inside of this location. And then the other one says that all the wealth of the house. Now, the wealth of the house is not the gold and silver. The wealth of the house would be the implements from the Beit HaMikdash or the tabernacle. The precious, really precious treasures are those items. So those are the only 2 that are mentioned that are outside of the ruins of Qumran, but they are within, both of them are inside of that cave.
Right. So just to recap, so you felt that cave was on the way to Mount Nebo. That's how you would translate.
Yes, I do believe that's why, because Mount Nebo, I measured it, just so happens yesterday as we were talking about the Day of Atonement ago. The distance is about 20 miles over there. So it, probably from Qumran, it's probably another 8-hour walk. Right. Spend the night there at Qumran, do what you got to do, and get up the next morning and head on to Mount Nebo. So, which is about 8 hours. And I'm guessing, I don't know exactly, maybe a little less, a little more.
Right. Well, now I have a question here to someone. So how do you, if you think the ark is, I'm sure you're familiar with Ron Wyatt,
Oh, of course.
and he's, technically he found an ark under the Temple Mount, correct? I mean, do you have any comment on that, or?
Yeah, I do. I'm asked that just about every presentation I give,
Okay, so we're trying.
and yeah, no, and I got a lot of respect for Ron Wyatt. I think he was a good person. I think he was a great guy, and I think his research about the Noah's Ark and the Red Sea crossing is the most amazing one to me.
Right.
What he found there, and I really respect the guy, but is his documentation on the Ark of the Covenant, I couldn't get it. Even years ago, before I ever knew about the Copper Scrolls, I didn't get it because I looked at it and it was kind of like looking at, my wife would show me my new grandbaby, the sonogram, and I'm looking at it going, okay, which is the parts of the head and which is the toes? I could, and was same with the Ron White picture that is there, and again, with respect to him, if there was blood that was dripped on the ark, on the Ark of the Covenant, you don't run it down through dirt. You never do that. That blood is supposed to be pure and maintained in a holy receptacle. You don't pour it on dirt or down an old wooden cross, if you will. Uh, you don't do that. And where was the documentation? I mean, if I had documentation showing that there was blood from potentially from Yeshua, I would have that in a bank vault somewhere to maintain and keep that for future generations. That would be a
Right.
precious document. But there was none of that. And again, this was with all due respect to him.
Right. Well, I will have to say back to my theory, which if there could be two arcs, they had to have a replica. I read in text, I have read very quickly that they did make another arc. So again, drama is not over. We could take a lot more twists and turns here before we wrap this up. But couple more questions, because we are
Not a problem.
someone did ask about you. We talked about the 144,000. We didn't mention the two witnesses. I mean, that's always another hot button question. Do you have do you see Qumran and the two witnesses, any relationship there?
Other than the stories, biblical stories, no, I can't imagine what Qumran's role would be in that, other than returning the vessels. I think it's entirely possible that the witnesses are on earth today. I think our Jewish brothers are really in high anticipation, and as well as Christians, high anticipation of the Messiah. And I think that those witnesses, I think there will be descendants of the proper lineage. I think they will be like Yeshua and John the Baptist. They met all the requirements, and they were in the spirit and power of those people.
Right.
That's my understanding of it. So I think it's entirely probable that they're here on earth today, ready to go, and they may not even know who they are. Be honest with you, they may not know because John didn't know. I mean, here's a Melchizedek priest, and he didn't realize because remember the Pharisees came to him. They said, "Are you that prophet? Are you the Messiah? Are you Elijah?" And he said no to all of them. Well, he was wrong. Yeshua brought it up, and he was absolutely right.
Which is one of the signs of a Mashiach, is that they can read people, so to speak. I've read this. The rabbis have lists of qualifications for Mashiach, but is to be able to kind of, I guess that's why with the tribes, he'll just be able to look at you and know what tribe you're from. I mean, he can just immediately, okay, you're Levi, go over there. You're from Benjamin, go over there. So we will see. But another question is, any opinion as to why it has taken this long to come out, the treasures and the artifacts? And you also said, like, why me? is there anything in the current timing that makes you feel like we're getting closer? I mean, I think a lot of people have this sense of anticipation now. There's a lot of sense of
Oh, yes. Yeah.
something's ramping up really large,
Hmm.
bigger than us.
Yeah, and you're going to have to repeat your question, at least the first part, because you were breaking up really bad for me. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Well, I think we answered this, but why do you think it has taken so long for these artifacts or treasures for this to come out? But I'll let you answer it. I shouldn't try to.
Okay, here's the deal. This is a very oversimplified answer to that question, but it's not the time. God has an exact specific time, and the biggest, worldly opposition to it is the location. It's in what is the so-called West Bank, Judea,
Right.
Samaria, and there's political problems that could erupt. The Palestinians. I was talking to a group of men at Qumran. They set up a meeting with the head of the Qumran, the head of the National Parks Authority, the lead archaeologist of the National Parks Authority, the head of Masada. We were all there at Qumran, and I was giving them a presentation on my research. The archaeologist came in and he said, "Mr. Barfield, I apologize." And I'm getting the answer to this in a second. He said, "I apologize. I've only got 30 minutes." He said, "I promised you an hour and a half." He said, "I've only got 30 minutes. Well, when I began, I told him, I said, "If I can't convince you in 15 minutes, I will walk you to the door and open your door for you at your car." And he laughed. An hour and a half later, he was still sitting there.
Hmm.
And as we were talking, I was talking to the head of the Qumran at the time, and he's passed away now. I mean, wonderful man. He said, I said, "Gentlemen, you understand that there's going to be problems with the Palestinians if we find these artifacts." I
Right.
said, "They're going to cause a lot of problems." And the gentleman, the head of the Qumran, set up. He said, "Mr. Barfield, when do we not have problems with the Palestinians?" Meaning, what's the holdup? He wanted it out. They wanted it out. At the end of that conversation, they were all trying to figure out ways to go dig it up. And it was only 120 yards away from us.
Right. Right.
So there's a lot of political things that are holding it up, is my whole purpose of that story.
Right. And this is why you just can't really see down the road too far how it's all
No,
going to play out.
I
But
can't.
yeah, Ronnie from the Limitless channel had that same question. Is like, and the question is, who owns the treasure? I mean, obviously, to me, well, Hashem owns everything, but these are the treasures of Israel, of Judah. I mean, I can't see the Palestinians being able to have a legal,
No,
there's no way anyone could
no.
claim to them other than.
Israel may be slow about getting it out of the ground, but they will fight. They will
Oh,
fight
they'll fight, exactly. Oh my gosh.
to keep these items because
Right.
they are from the heart of Israel's past. They will fight to keep it. And if I'm there, hand me a gun. I'm going to stand with them. I love my brothers, Judah. I love Israel, and I'm going to stand with them.
Right. And that was, Lisa, the last question, actually 2 questions. Someone wanted to know if you possibly think you are also yourself from the order of Melchizedek. Do you think that you could have
I don't.
like that done?
Let me tell you this. And whenever I used to teach a lot at the Messianic congregations, it's really getting big now, and I'm teaching at more than just Messianic congregations. But I would ask every time, I would ask them, I would like everyone in this room that is firstborn, male and female, please raise your hand. And invariably, over 50% would raise their hands. Firstborns. There is something in our DNA, and I am firstborn, that we instinctively know that we need to be doing, and we need to be keeping these things holy, and we need to be passing on this information from family member to family member as we grow older. So in that sense, yeah, I think I will be part of the Melchizedek order someday. I would like that, but I promise you, I am not of the holy status. I'm not the righteous status that is required. I would take a lot more cleaning on me to get me to the level that the men of Qumran
I
are.
know we can all say that. Let me just on the side, because even from studying though the firstborns, technically in almost all the Bible stories, the person who received the firstborn
Yeah.
was not technically the firstborn. So I mean, and I know you've been saying that it's men, and because again, I look at a lot of these words are encoded, but so the firstborn doesn't. It's a thing of the heart, and even Hashem says, I look at the heart. Like Abraham was the middle child, and I mean, there's so many places Shem was in the middle. So, and these were all firstborns of the order of Melchizedek. So, I think it's a question of the heart spiritually, and women. I mean, this whole thing. I do think there's that very encrypted. I'm sure you're familiar with it, verse in the Gospel of Thomas, where it talks about when the female becomes male. Are you familiar? There's that women, and it's very highly encrypted, and I know people have tripped all over themselves trying to decipher it, what it means, but I think the Yeshua, the curses from Eden, he put an end to them. So to me, it opens the door up for anyone whose heart is pure and open and in level of holiness and
Well,
relationship.
let me give you a little bit more for that. Huldah, she
Right.
was a prophetess.
Mm-hmm.
You don't become prophetess by waking up one morning and decided, oh, I've been in church a week now, I think I'm a prophet. That's not the way it works back in the old days. And think about it. In Numbers chapter 6, it says this vow, Nazirite vow, is for male and for females.
Mm-hmm.
So women could reach the same level of holiness. And my wife and I talk about this a lot, is there are things that she knows instinctively that I had to study for. And I think God made us that way. Women have got so many other obligations to the children, to the, they've got so many obligations that I think God instinctively has placed within females the ability to not have to study as much as men. More intelligent, probably, yeah. They have a gifting to be able to. It's like an intuition. My wife would say, I would tell her, "Look, oh my gosh, look what I found." And she said, "Yeah, Jimmy, and that's obvious." And I'd say, "Oh, get away from me! Go, go back to your dishes."
Well, no, I think that's also a sign of the times that women, that everyone is being welcomed to the table who is showing the heart, the purity, the obedience, and the
I
willing.
think it's important for the ladies to be involved. I think it's very, very important for the ladies to be involved. My wife and I we decided to go to church the first time exactly at the same time. We came to the conclusion of Torah in totally different circumstances at the exact same time. So that's important for the husband and wife to be a team, and she's truly my team.
Right. Well, that's great. Well, Jim, I think we've probably run our time limit up here. So I thoroughly enjoyed it, and it went really fast. And I mean, I have a question here. Someone is asking, will you come back on? So maybe
Yeah, I would love to
come back from Israel and give us a whole new give us a recap of what happened. I know people really want to stay abreast of this. This is a great story, and we really want to pray for you. Is there any way we can pray for you? Is there anything, just obviously protection, and you want to just give us some hint?
Yeah, and that's the biggest thing. I'm not asking for money. I want you to pray. And that is truly the greatest possible thing you can do. All of you in the listening audience, pray that we do the Father's will. And here's what we always ask: close the doors that need to be closed and open the doors that need to be opened. And I hope and pray that soon we'll be opening up the door of the cave, and
Right.
we will be able to see the things that God has provided for us for His dowry.
Right, the bride.
The
As
bride.
the Spirit and the bride say, "Come, come,
Amen.
Adonai Yeshua, come."
Amen.
Come, Lord Jesus. So, well, on that note, Jim, it was wonderful. And yes, so we'll talk again. We will see you soon. And we'll pray have a safe and a very fruitful trip to Israel. Tell all the brethren, tell all of us House of Judah brethren hello. We love them.
I'll do that. Thank you very much, guys. I very much enjoyed this.
All right. Shalom.
Shalom.